It's time for Wheels Wednesday. This is where we talk about everything auto related and we help you make the right choice because this is, after all, something that you spend a lot of money on. Now, a lot of people are contemplating, especially in the big cities, moving from manual transmission to automatic transition. Or in fact, when they're going for their first car itself, they're looking at automatic transmission because they don't want to get into the whole clutch brake issue when you're driving in traffic. And this is an important thing to consider, but there are various types of technology within the automatic transmission options that you will find. And we're going to talk about all of the different options available and which you should consider based on the pros and cons of each of them. Sergius Barretto, who is the managing editor at Autocar India, is joining me now. Sergius, thank you so much for taking the time. And always a pleasure speaking with you. There are a few to talk about. Let's start with AMT and then we'll move to the rest. What is AMT? How does it work? And what are the pros and cons?
Sure. So Alex, as you correctly said, there's different technologies as far as automatic gearboxes are concerned. They all essentially do the same thing, which is allow you to drive concentrating only on the accelerator and the brake, so you don't have the clutch pedal and you don't have to shift gears. Now, the AMT, as you said, let's start there. It is, in a way, the cheapest or the entry point into the world of automatics. It's essentially an automated manual transmission. AMT essentially stands for that, automated manual transmission. So, in a sense, it's an manual gearbox. Everything is the same. It's just that they've added these motors and actuators that sort of do the work for you. So, there is a clutch that's being pressed, but not by you. It's by an actuator that, presses the clutch, releases the clutch, shifts gears, etc. Now, obviously, as you can imagine, the benefit to that is that it's very cheap because in a sense, you're using a regular manual gearbox and you're just adding these actuators and motors and obviously software control. The only drawback to that is it's not very smooth, because it's a manual gearbox and you're having this sort of robotization underneath. So you can feel the shift jerks. At times you would have seen we very often when we review the cars, we describe it as head nod. So, when you feel that automatic shifting, you'll sort of nod forward like that. And, for us, any car that has that head nod, we try and see, how less is it, because ultimately, what you want from an automatic is a smooth drive. But it does its job for its price. It's a very good solution.
Head here, and I'm not driving an AMT. But let's talk about a dual clutch. What differentiates a dual clutch from an AMT?
Sure. So okay. In fact, if I could just divert slightly here, Alex, if you don't mind. Yeah. So while you have AMT, which is an automated manual transmission, you also have an IMT, which Hyundai, it's a term that they are using, which is the intelligent manual transmission. Essentially, it's an AMT with but half an AMT, if I could describe it that way. So you have no clutch pedal. There's an actuator there doing the clutch work for you, but you have to shift the gears. So it's halfway there, and you can take a pick. So sorry, I just wanted to divert a little bit there because there is an AMT and then there is this IMT, which Hyundai also sell as a type of automatic because essentially you don't have the clutch. But you do have to just shift gears, and of course the computer then disengages the clutch. But coming to your question on the DCT or the DSG, different manufacturers, by the way, use different acronyms because they want to sound different from each other. So DCT is dual clutch transmission now, or DSG, which is a dual shift gearbox. It's essentially a very similar in principle to a manual or to an AMT, but in construction, it's completely different. So you have dual clutches essentially there, and that's the big difference. So like, I was just speaking earlier, in a automated manual, you do feel that sort of pause between shifts. And that's because, the clutch has to engage, disengage, and, engage the next gear back again. In a dual clutch transmission, they use two clutches. So essentially, while one is disengaging, the other is already engaging the next gear. So you kind of have like a seamless or rather a quicker shift, much quicker shift. In fact, a lot of the sportier cars, tend to have a dual clutch transmission. Now, like we were saying on the AMTs, it's generally the lower end cars. So you'll find an AMT on some of the Maruti Celerio, the WagonR, etc. A dual clutch transmission you'll find on, well, a little bit more expensive cars. You have it on, for example, a Hyundai Venue. So that's essentially the difference between a dual clutch. It just uses two clutches so that when one is disengaging, the other one is engaging, and you get a quicker shift.
So therefore, they are on either end of the price spectrum as well, I would think. What
Yes.
what would you say in terms of the torque converter? Because I know that Volkswagen, for example, has both a torque converter option as well as a DSG, as they call it, right?
Yes.
So how does the torque converter work? How is it different?
Yeah, so essentially, the torque converter is another type of gearbox, automatic gearbox, and you also have CVT. We'll get to that later. But the torque converter is what many people regard as the classic or the traditional automatic gearbox. Because if you look at what we spoke about so far, an AMT, it's essentially an automated manual, a dual clutch. Again, it's a manual gearbox with two clutches. So it's a little quicker. A torque converter is essentially, well, I like to describe it as a fluid coupling. So you don't have like a clutch device there. It's fluid transmission of power. So you have like there's a fan, or what you call an impeller, which is churning oil, and that oil hits the other fan, which drives the wheels. So it's a fluid coupling in between. And really, the torque converter is the smoothest automatic gearbox that you will find. It's been around for a long time, so they are really very reliable also. And because there are fewer mechanical parts, there's not all of these actuators, motors, and stuff like that, and dual clutches. It's a lot more simpler too. The only thing is it's quite heavy, in terms of its construction weight, and it's not very efficient in power transmission. So fuel efficiency does drop with a torque converter. But if you want a very smooth drive experience, then really this should be at the top of your list.
There's one more to talk about, and then I'll ask you, obviously there's no one answer, but I'll come to that. First, let's talk about CVT. How is CVT different?
Right. So CVT is continuously variable transmission. And from the name, you can probably guess continuously variable. So essentially, there are no fixed gears. Like in an AMT, you have 4, 5, 6 speeds, etc. A dual clutch, similarly, like you spoke of, the Volkswagen, they have a 7-speed DCT. So there are 7 gears there. In a CVT, it's what we call a belt and pulley system. So there's a conical pulley, so the cone, increases and decreases in diameter, and the belt slides over, up and down the cone, effectively varying the gear ratio. So you get the larger sort of ratio for when you want to climb slopes or to start off, and then the belt slides down to the smaller end of the cone when you want a higher speed. So here too, it's a seamless shift, like I was describing earlier, the fluid coupling or the torque converter, and very smooth. The only sort of drawback here is you tend to feel what we call the rubber band effect. And what happens is, the belt begins to slide, and you can feel, and hear sometimes the change in the engine note before you can actually feel any change in pace. So that's the only drawback. But, today CVTs, they're doing a fantastic job with refining them. We have them in fact, Honda and Nissan use them a lot. So you can have a CVT, for example, in even something like a Honda Amaze, both on the petrol and the diesel. And it's a really good combination. It's very smooth, like I was saying, seamless shifts. The only bit is sometimes you will feel that little bit of rubber band-like effect where you can hear the engine going, the revs are climbing or decreasing, and then you can feel the change in pace. But that's essentially what a CVT is.
So I think we've covered all of the bases. You know what? We'll do this. In the next conversation we have, we'll talk about specific models and price points and use cases for each of these.
Right.
But I think this has been a great primer for somebody going out into the market looking for an automatic gearbox.
Right.
They'll know what they're looking for. But Sergius, thank you so much for taking the time.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Alex.